Let me ask you something. Have you ever found yourself in a moment where everything feels too much? Not just a bad day, but a deep, unsettling heaviness that lingers. The kind that makes you question where you're headed, why things aren't working out, or whether you're even enough. We all wrestle with negative feelings. No one is immune to them. But have you ever stopped to ask why they have so much power over us? Why do they take up so much space in our minds? Why do they keep us up at night, replaying conversations, making us overthink decisions, and second-guessing our worth? I believe part of the reason is that we have learned to measure our peace by how much control we have. We think if I can just figure this out, if I can just plan enough, if I can just be perfect, then I won't feel this way. But the truth is, negative emotions aren't a result of what's happening around us. They come from what we believe about what's happening. Think about it. Two people can face the same situation. One crumbles under the weight of it, while the other somehow finds peace. Why? Because peace was never about circumstances. It was always about trust. And trust requires us to do something incredibly difficult. Let go. But letting go is terrifying, isn't it? Because if we let go, then what? What happens to the things we can't control? What happens to the outcome we so desperately want? That's where faith comes in. You see, faith isn't just about believing in God's existence. It's about believing in his intention toward you. It's one thing to know that God is, but it's another to trust that he is for you, that he is leading you, covering you, working things out even when everything in your life feels like it's unraveling. I think of moments in my own life where I felt like I was losing control. Moments where I was exhausted from trying, exhausted from caring so much, exhausted from feeling like I had to hold everything together. And I remember how easy it was to slip into frustration with myself, frustration with God, frustration with the waiting. But here's what I realized. Every time I reached the end of myself, I was actually at the beginning of something greater, because God never asked me to carry the weight of my own life. He never asked me to fix everything, figure everything out, or prove myself worthy. He simply asked me to trust. And trust isn't about having all the answers. It's about being willing to believe that even in the unknown, God is still working. But let's be honest. Trusting God sounds beautiful until it requires us to release something we really want to hold on to. It's easy to say, I trust God, until we have to trust him with timing, with relationships, with closed doors, with unanswered prayers. And in those moments, it's so tempting to ask, why? Why is this happening? Why do I feel this way? Why hasn't God fixed this yet? But what if we started asking a different question? Instead of asking why, what if we started asking, what is this teaching me? What is God trying to show me? Because God doesn't waste pain. He doesn't waste confusion. He doesn't waste the moments we wish never happened. He uses them. He uses them to refine us, to redirect us, to strengthen us, to prepare us. And that means even our negative feelings, the frustration, the disappointment, the fear, are not signs that we're failing. They're signs that we're human. And being human means we need something greater than ourselves to hold on to. So maybe today you're in a place where you feel stuck. Maybe your mind has been filled with worry, or your heart has been weighed down with doubt. And maybe, just maybe, you've been trying to figure out how to get rid of those feelings. But what if the answer isn't to fight harder? What if the answer is to release the fight altogether? To say, God, I don't know what's next. I don't know how this will turn out, but I trust you. Because when we do that, something shifts. The weight starts to lift, not because we have all the answers, but because we no longer need them. And maybe for the first time in a long time, we can breathe again. There's something about uncertainty that makes us uncomfortable. We don't like not knowing. We don't like feeling like we don't have control over what happens next. And so what do? We try to manage everything. We plan, we strategize, we overthink, we stress. Because deep down, we believe that if we just work hard enough, if we just do everything right, we can force things to go our way. But what happens when, despite our best efforts, things still don't work out? What happens when the relationship ends? The opportunity slips away. The door closes, or the timing is off. What do we do when all of our planning and controlling still leaves us feeling empty, restless, or stuck? That's when we come face to face with the truth we don't always want to accept. Control is an illusion. We were never in control to begin with. And yet, we spend so much time exhausting ourselves trying to hold on to something we were never meant to carry. And I get it. Letting go feels risky. Surrendering to God's plan feels uncomfortable, especially when it doesn't look the way we expected. But here's the thing. If we only trust God when things make sense, then that's not trust. It's agreement. True trust is when we release the need to understand and choose to believe that God's hands are stronger than ours. Think about a child. When a child is afraid, what do? They reach for a parent's hand. They don't need to understand every detail about where they're going. They don't need a full explanation of how things will work out. They just trust that as long as they are in the right hands, they are safe. But somewhere along the way, we unlearn that kind of trust. We grow up and suddenly we think we have to figure it all out on our own. We stop reaching for God's hand. Instead, we try to control outcomes. We convince ourselves that we have to make everything happen, that we have to have all the answers, that we have to force things into place. And in doing so, we rob ourselves of the peace that only comes from surrender. Because real peace isn't found in control. It's found in trust. Letting go doesn't mean we stop caring. It doesn't mean we stop making an effort. It means we stop carrying what was never ours to hold in the first place. It means we stop trying to force things and start allowing God to move in His own way, in His own timing. And I know that's not always easy. I know how hard it is to release something you really want, something you've prayed for, something you've worked so hard for. But here's what I've learned. Whenever God asks us to let go, it's not because He's trying to take something from us. It's because He's trying to make room for something greater. But we can't receive with clenched fists. We can't walk into what's next if we're still holding on to what was. We can't step into the future while being weighed down by the past. Maybe right now, you're holding on to something that God has been asking you to release. Maybe it's a relationship, a plan, an expectation. Maybe it's the need for validation, the need for answers, the need for things to happen a certain way. And maybe you've been wrestling with the thought, what if I let go and nothing better comes? What if I surrender and things don't work out? But what if the real question is, what if I let go and what's waiting for me is greater than anything I could have imagined? Because that's the thing about God. He never asks us to release something without the intention of replacing it with something better. And better doesn't always mean bigger. Sometimes better is just peace. Sometimes better is clarity. Sometimes better is finally being free from the weight of overthinking, the weight of trying to make everything happen on our own. So today, I want to challenge you. What would it look like if you loosened your grip? What would it look like if you stopped striving, stopped controlling, stopped overanalyzing, and simply said, God, I trust you? Because the truth is, life is going to happen whether we try to control it or not. And peace isn't found in trying to manipulate every outcome. Peace is found in knowing that no matter what happens, no matter what changes, no matter what doors open or close, you are in the hands of a God who sees the full picture. A God who is not surprised by anything you're facing. A God who is already making a way. So maybe today's the day you stop holding on so tightly. Maybe today is the day you surrender, not because you're giving up, but because you're finally making room for what's next. Have you ever noticed how quickly fear takes over when things don't go as planned? The moment we lose control, the moment life doesn't unfold the way we expected, fear creeps in. And fear has a way of making everything feel permanent. It tells us this is how it will always be. This situation will never change. You will never overcome this. But what if fear is lying? What if the very thing you see as a setback is actually setting you up for something greater? What if what feels like a roadblock is actually a redirection? What if what looks like a delay is actually divine timing? The problem is that we have been conditioned to see struggles as punishments. When things don't go our way, we assume that something is wrong, that we are being overlooked, that God is withholding something from us. But what if our struggles are not happening to us, but for us? Think about every great story you've ever heard. Every hero, every leader, every person who has done something meaningful has faced moments where it seemed like everything was against them. And yet, those moments were not the end of their story. They were the moments that shaped them. They were the moments that prepared them for what was next. David didn't face Goliath because he was being punished. He faced Goliath because he was being positioned. Joseph wasn't betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, and thrown into prison because God had forgotten about him. Every painful moment, every unfair situation was positioning him for a purpose far greater than he could have imagined. And if that was true for them, then why wouldn't it be true for you? What if the challenge you are facing right now is not meant to destroy you, but to develop you? What if what feels like a closed door is actually God protecting you from something not meant for you? What if what seems like rejection is actually redirection? The enemy wants you to believe that the struggle you are in is proof that God has forgotten you. But God's silence is not his absence. Just because you don't see him moving doesn't mean he isn't working. Fear wants you to look at your circumstances and come to the worst conclusion. It wants you to believe that your current situation is permanent. But faith invites you to believe in something greater. Faith challenges you to trust in what you can't see. Because the truth is, fear and faith require the same thing. They both require you to believe in something that hasn't happened yet. Fear tells you to believe in the worst. Faith tells you to believe in God's best. The question is, which one will you choose? And I get it. Choosing faith is not always easy. When you're in the middle of uncertainty, when things aren't making sense, when you feel like you've been waiting for so long, it's tempting to let fear win. It's tempting to assume the worst. to assume that things will never change. But I want you to consider this. What if this moment of waiting, this moment of uncertainty, is actually God's way of preparing you? Because here's what I know. God does not waste pain. He does not waste seasons of waiting. He does not waste the moments we wish never happened. He uses them. And sometimes he allows us to go through things, not because he wants us to suffer, but because he wants us to see what's inside of us. Sometimes he allows the storm to come, not to destroy us, but to reveal what needs to be strengthened. What if instead of asking, why is this happening to me? You started asking, what is this teaching me? What if instead of seeing your struggle as a punishment, you started seeing it as preparation? Because the truth is, every great promise comes with a process. And sometimes the process is uncomfortable. Sometimes it requires stretching, waiting, trusting, even when things don't make sense. But just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean it's not working. So what if you made the decision today to stop seeing your struggles as a sign that you are stuck and start seeing them as a sign that God is preparing you? What if you decided to stop giving fear the final say? Because here's what I know. When you trust God with your process, you won't just survive the storm. You come out stronger. You come out wiser. You come out prepared for what he has been leading you to all along. And maybe, just maybe, you'll look back on this moment one day and realize that what you thought was the worst thing that could have happened was actually the thing that led you exactly where you were meant to be. It's one thing to say we trust God, but what does that actually look like in our daily lives? What does it mean to leave everything in his hands? Not just in theory, but in the moments when anxiety creeps in, when disappointment hits, when fear tries to take over. Because let's be honest, trust isn't just a feeling, it's a decision. A choice we make over and over again, especially when life feels uncertain. It's the decision to stop obsessing over things we can't control and start focusing on what we can do. It's the decision to release the need to know every detail of how things will work out and to believe that God already has it handled. But sometimes we confuse trust with passivity. We think that trusting God means sitting back and waiting for everything to magically fall into place. But that's not what trust looks like. Trust is active. Trust means moving forward, even when we don't have all the answers. Trust means waking up each day and choosing faith over fear, peace over panic, action over anxiety. Because the truth is, we can't just pray for peace and continue to live in a way that invites chaos. We can't ask God for direction and then ignore the small steps he's already placed in front of us. Sometimes we're waiting on God to move, but God is waiting on us to take a step. And that step doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as shifting our focus. Instead of spending the day overanalyzing what went wrong, what if we started our day with gratitude? Instead of replaying the past, what if we started speaking life into our future? Instead of letting fear dictate our choices, what if we moved forward, even if it was just one small act of faith at a time? Because fear wants to keep us stuck. It wants to convince us that we have to figure everything out before we can take a step. But faith invites us to move, even in uncertainty. And the beautiful thing about faith is that we don't have to see the whole staircase. We just have to take the next step. Think about the moments in your life when you felt the most overwhelmed. Maybe it was a season of waiting, a season of loss, a season of transition. And in those moments, how easy was it to get caught up in overthinking? How easy was it to let worry take over? Because when we feel like we don't have control, our first instinct is often to overanalyze, to try to predict every possible outcome. But what does that actually do? Does it solve anything, or does it just make us more anxious? The enemy loves to keep us trapped in cycles of overthinking because he knows that as long as we are stuck in our minds, we won't move forward. As long as we are paralyzed by fear, we won't take the steps we are called to take. But what if, instead of focusing on all the things we don't know, we started focusing on what we do know? What if we reminded ourselves that even when we don't have all the details, we have a God who sees the full picture? What if we started living as if we actually believed that He is faithful? Because trust isn't just about saying, God, I believe. You can do it. It's about living in a way that reflects that belief. It's about waking up each day and choosing to show up, to keep moving forward, to keep believing, even when things don't make sense yet. So maybe today, the step of faith you need to take isn't a huge leap. Maybe it's something small but significant. Maybe it's choosing to speak words of life instead of words of doubt. Maybe it's deciding to stop rehearsing worst case scenarios and start believing in God's best. Maybe it's simply choosing to breathe, to rest, to remind yourself that you don't have to have everything figured out because the one who holds your future already does. And maybe, just maybe, the moment you decide to take that step, you'll realize that the peace you've been searching for has been available all along. It was never waiting for things to change. It was waiting for you to trust.